But what has also changed is that bad debts have been bundled up and sold around like sacks of plastic casino counters between banks so many times that nobody knows just who is in trouble, and for how many $1 billion. In great US institutions like Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley and Citigroup, the one-time wizards started to lose their jobs. Meanwhile, back in Britain, its Prime Minister lost his. Tony Blair carried on working at strategic plans almost until the day he finally left Downing Street. It was as if he was still waiting for a final vindicating victory in Iraq, or believed that if he could only nail down one last element of his programme to the cabinet table, his domestic legacy would be secured. But at last he went, in June 2007, telling the Commons, "I wish everyone, friend and foe, well. And that is that. The end." Gordon Brown took over without the bloodbath or recriminations that had been so widely predicted. He promised to govern differently, to take the cabinet more seriously, and to be more inclusive, bringing in outsiders with police, military and business careers to advise him, and Liberal Democrats too. To start with, all this was popular. Under Brown, Labour rose sharply in the polls, and many Conservatives were dejected. Perhaps he would not turn out to be the disaster they had predicted. Their new leader, David Cameron, was attacked for being lightweight, the heir to Blair, just when the country had had enough of Blair. There was muttering about replacing him. So there was too about Sir Mingus Campbell, who was attacked not for being in his 60s, but for looking as if he was. A sequence of crises, including terrorist attacks in Glasgow and London, widespread summer flooding and an outbreak of foot and mouth disease, seemed to show Brown as a decisive, rather traditional leader, and his position strengthened further. Then in the autumn of 2007, it all started to go wrong for him. By far the most ominous event was the revelation that an adventurous building society based in the northeast of England had been forced to go to the Bank of England for emergency support. What had happened to Northern Rock, Britain's fifth largest provider of mortgages, was the direct consequence of those subprime problems in America earlier in the year. Mud and ice were spreading through the Western banking system as banks, wondering how much bad debt others were exposed to, stopped lending readily to one another. The lubrication began to fail, and because Northern Rock had lent so much money so aggressively, it was first in trouble. Its bosses resigned, but not before the world had watched huge queues of people across Britain waiting to get their money out. It was the first run on a bank in this country for 140 years. The new Chancellor, Alistair Darling, promised to guarantee all savers' funds in Northern Rock, though not elsewhere, in order to shore up the stability of the banking system. The Bank of England injected money into the system to provide some more lubrication. A search began to find a private buyer who would take over Northern Rock without being completely underwritten by the taxpayer. And another search began to find who was to blame. The management of Northern Rock? American banks? The Bank of England, which had reacted slowly to the early signs of trouble? Most attention focused on the Prime Minister, who had created the new system of banking regulation early in his time as Chancellor. In the end, the building society had to be nationalised. A whiff of the 70s. The Northern Rock crisis began just when pressure was mounting on Brown to call an early general election. Things came to a head at the Labour Party conference at Bournemouth. Some of the cabinet ministers closest to him were convinced that by going to the country in October 2007, capitalising on his summer successes, he could win a clear and substantial majority over the Tories. But he hesitated. The following week, as the Tories gathered for their conference at Blackpool, their mood was grim, and there was open talk in the bars about forcing out yet another leader. Then came a speech by the Shadow Chancellor George Osborne, in which he promised to abolish inheritance tax on estates worth under £1 million and scrap the stamp duty for first-time buyers on homes worth up to £250,000. This would be paid for by a new tax on foreigners living and earning in Britain.